Hey everyone, welcome to the How to Shoot Hybrid podcast from Your Story Studios. I'm Lindsay and this is Jules, and we are a husband and wife team of photographers and videographers and creative business owners. On this podcast, we discuss photography, videography, filmmaking and topics around building successful and sustainable businesses. Sometimes we share things that we've experienced ourselves or things that we've learned along our journey, and sometimes we speak with guests who share their own experiences too. We want to build here an open-minded community of how to learn and grow, and we hope that you guys enjoy joining us.
So, Linz, what we've been up to this week, it's been a bit of a different one.
Bit of a different one. Went to Ibiza, you know.
Yeah, it was we don't do a lot of destination weddings, do we?
We don't do any.
We don't do any
We've never
usually.
done any.
We've never really tried to do that. And this opportunity came up. Once you get so far into doing weddings, unless you actually from the start doing destination weddings, I think it's a bit more difficult to get into because you put your price point up, and then I think you've got to basically get some really high roller weddings to make it worth your while, haven't you? So it's just the opportunity's never come up to do destination weddings. This was a good opportunity, and because it was Ibiza, it made a lot of sense because that kind of wedding, particularly with this couple and the location and everything, it matched our brand, didn't it?
Yeah.
So it was a good opportunity to do one.
Yeah. And I think as well that just with Ibiza, I think there's probably just a little bit of the automatic assumption is it's Party Island, it's San Antonio, it's the big clubs.
Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was really beautiful, wasn't it?
No, it was, yeah. We to some beautiful parts of the island.
But it was definitely a party atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
Like even the start of the wedding, which was in this country, in someone's garden, it was a Jewish wedding, so it was very animated, lots of dancing, lots of kind of traditions that you wouldn't associate with your typical UK wedding. So there was a lot of elements to it, a lot of great content, storytelling elements to it.
Yeah.
Really great atmosphere, really fun people that were just it was just one massive party for like 4 days, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it was so nice actually because each of the days that we were with them, something different was happening.
Yeah. So there's a lot of contrast there.
Yeah. So yeah, really, really fantastic opportunity to have done that. And I think I said, if that's the only one we ever get to do, well, I just, for me, I'm happy just to end it there.
Yeah.
Once in a lifetime thing, because I think other weddings might struggle to live up to that one, to be honest, because it was so much variety. Yeah, just really nice people, good people as well. So lovely to be amongst.
Yeah. And it's full. We're fully getting into kind of the wedding season again now, aren't we? We've got a little break to catch up with the editing, but essentially this is where it starts towards the end of this month, start of next month, starts to ramp up.
Yeah.
And then July, August is busy. So yeah, to pick up from last week's episode, we were going to talk about the reasons that you should learn to consider shooting both photo and video together. But we had to think about it and thought it might be helpful before we go through that particular episode and topic that if we discuss kind of how photography and filmmaking have evolved over the years and like historically now. Because I think that it's hard to see where you're going unless you can see what's happened in the past. It's, you base things on evidence, don't you, of like what's happened in the past, so what's likely to happen in the future. It's hard for us to say what's likely happening, but we can already see some of the really big strides in artificial intelligence and how that's influencing and impacting the photography and videography filmmaking industry. And that's happening at a really rapid pace. And the idea of talking about past things in this episode and kind of the current things is because if you look at how quickly things have developed historically and how quick things are developing now, it's very obvious how in 5 years' time it might be unrecognisable what we do. There's a chance. I'm not saying we won't be doing what we're doing, but the way we're doing it is probably going to be quite different, which is relevant, I think, to hybrid shooting, because it's something that is definitely growing quicker than, in the last 1 to 2 years. The idea that somebody, either a single person or a single team, capturing photo and video would happen, would be requested or would be something that people wanted, that's increased massively in the last 2 years compared to the previous sort of 4 or 5 years before that. So, if you think about how things have changed in general photo and video terms and weddings, it's pretty mind-blowing what technology is doing. So, I think we're going to go back to whenever it started.
Yeah. Well, I don't know anything about that. I've never cared to learn about anything like that, or taking it upon myself, I should say. So I just know how to use the camera. But I guess I have no understanding of how that all came about, where it all started.
Well, we both went to uni a few years ago. You did business. I realised I probably should have done business too. But I did photography and film. So we both studied a few years ago different things. And as part of that degree, they make you look at this stuff. So I do have a little bit of knowledge. But we're not going to go massively into it. I'm going to try and scan through the headlines. So to make it a bit more interesting, so you don't fall asleep, ask some questions along the way, Linz, because I'm sure, we want it to be conversational. We don't want it to be like me reeling off a load of memorable dates or something. Yeah?
Yeah.
So if we look at kind of lots and lots of sources, it's hard to say when people started creating images, because if you research it, there are things all over the world of people in different parts of the world doing things that would have constituted capturing an image.
Okay.
And they were kind of writing about it in old, types of language and things. But the first kind of images were used, were created using something called the camera obscura technique.
Okay.
Right. And it could have been happening as long as thousands of years ago, but certainly hundreds of years ago is when it first started being refined and used as more of a scientific method.
Okay.
So
you're going to tell us what that is?
Well, I'm not a scientist. Essentially, one of the first things they get you to do when you go do your photography degree is they talk about the pinhole camera.
Okay.
They essentially get you making a hole in a piece of card and then shining light through it to project an image. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's essentially what it is. And the idea is that it will project, if you do it in a certain way, it will project this image onto onto a surface. So it's almost like you're putting an image through something and it's focusing it. Right?
Okay.
That's essentially what it is. But the camera obscura basically would pass light through one tiny hole in a surface, a wall, whatever, and then it'd project it. It was inverted, but it'd project it onto a wall, another wall. All right? So you'd get an image of whatever was over there. So it was kind of projection.
I was going to say like a projector that we'd use now.
But instead of us shining the light through it and then using a lens to focus it, this was a very primitive kind of thing.
Okay.
They didn't have glass lenses and all that sort of thing. They were just using holes. But they realised that that's what it would do. So that's what all of the early photography stuff is based around. So it was a long time until people started trying to preserve that image, because obviously that's just projecting it. It's not making it so that you can look at it again later. So then there was a lot of work over a period of time. This kind of started in the 1700s. A guy called Thomas Wedgwood was basically using experimenting with chemicals. There were lots of people along the way. Like some of these names are not the only people involved. Like I'll mention names, but they're not the only people. There were lots and lots of people involved in this. It's just that these are the ones that kind of got picked out as pioneers. You know, they made some kind of breakthrough.
Right.
So Thomas Wedgwood was using like processes with chemicals and light exposure to create images, but he couldn't get them to fix. So, you know, he would make them on a surface, usually a metal surface, but they wouldn't stay there. They would fade away. So it wasn't until the early 1800s, a guy called Joseph Niepce, I think is the way to pronounce it, he created something called heliography and used the process of using chemicals and light exposure again, and to make this thing called lithographs. And they were done on silver plates, but they weren't very good. You know, they weren't the clearest of things. And then, you know, to make it something that people would be interested in, you needed them to look better when they were fixed. So they would stay there, but it was hard to tell detail of what they were.
Okay.
And in the, I think of 1829, he developed a partnership with someone called Louis Daguerre, or Louis Daguerre, whatever he's called. So they developed things further together. Niepce, however you pronounce it, died, and Daguerre went on to continue trying to develop this thing, and he developed this thing called the daguerreotype. And this is basically mirrors. So you might have seen these. I remember learning about this at uni and thinking, well, actually, I have seen these in, you know, I can't remember where, either like a grandparent's house or like some antique store or something, but they're basically like mirrors with images on them. So it looks like a photograph that's on a mirror,
Right.
but it's old school. And that is basically a daguerreotype. So what he was doing was using mercury, which was quite dangerous, and basically setting the image on a mirrored surface, but it was quite clear, and it kind of worked quite well in terms of, you know, how you could use those images.
Yeah.
But it was just, you know, I imagine expensive and not very useful in terms of like mass production. So a lot of things had to happen after that. Yeah. Around the same time, a guy called Henry Fox Talbot, he was working on a similar process called the calotype. This wasn't as popular at the time because the images weren't as clear, but what it was using a process where you could recreate that. You couldn't recreate a daguerreotype because it was on a mirror, and you couldn't then take that mirror and then produce a new image, right? You know, you couldn't replicate it. Yeah. Whereas the process that Fox Talbot is calotype, you could reproduce that image. So that is basically the basis of modern print creation.
Right.
So like that's where we got what we started to do through the 1900s. That's where that came from, essentially, that technology.
Yeah. I'm sure, you know, it's a couple of years ago, we went, I think it's because we've gone ice skating in Bradford or something like that.
We went to the
we
museum.
took the kids, to this Museum of Science and Media in Bradford. And just think, as you got talking through that, I'm sure that we've seen they'll have
all of these things.
Yeah.
They'll have these. I'm sure they've got copies of these early devices and daguerreotypes, things like that. They will.
Objects that
And if you are into photography, it depends where you're listening to this. You might not want to travel to Bradford from other parts of the world.
I'm sure there are other museums.
But it is, if you are into photography and media as a job or as a hobby and interest, it really is like quite interesting to go and see this stuff, because, you know, like Lindsay said, she knows how to use a camera today, but she doesn't know why we are in this position. And actually, that, I think, me looking into the history and me kind of like having a bit of an interest in it actually gives me more of an interest in where it's going, because I think it's fascinating how, you know, what we're actually able to do now. So over time, this guy's kind of done this process, the calotype, And from here, there's like, this is now the next big thing. So all the inventors and scientists are trying to make this process better, and technology will come on quite a long way. There's a few people like Peter Voigtlander and Carl Zeiss, who are names that you'll know today from creating lenses, and they were making lenses and they were getting involved in this process to try and refine it, to try and make image capture more sharp and better.
Right.
That's kind of what these names that are still used today.
Right. Well, that's interesting then. Sorry. So Carl Zeiss, I've heard of.
You've heard of, yeah.
I've seen the little blue square on
the
side of the lenses.
So that company is born from,
right. Well, good.
From this guy from the 1900s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it look and sound really bad if I say that I thought that was someone that Sony were still currently using to create their lenses?
Well, the company is.
Right. Oh,
so like, you know, just like a lot of companies, they're built on somebody who was, you know, did something popular in the thing. That person created a company. That company still exists, but obviously it's not owned by the same people anymore. But yeah, essentially that's it.
Okay.
So we go forward to like the late 1800s, 1878. A guy called Edwin Muybridge, he's doing some experiments. He wants to see if horses' feet, right, if a horse's hooves all leave the floor at the same time. So when a horse is galloping or running, he wants to know whether there's always a foot on the floor or whether all four leave the thing. So he sets up a series of cameras, and he is basically going to set off these cameras using a trigger system, right? Still image cameras.
Yeah.
To see whether that happens. And what he inadvertently does is creates kind of this flicker book situation where he series those images,
right,
and that is the first moving picture, because technically it's capturing these sets of individual images that he puts together into a moving picture that lasts like literally 2 seconds or something. So that was considered like the pioneer of moving image, which then, a few years after that, the Edison company successfully kind of got this prototype of this thing called the kinetoscope. I can't even read my own notes. So the kinetoscope basically was like this flick book inside this machine, and so someone could look through it and they could see this image going round. And it looked like it was a series of single images, but it looked like moving images. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was like considered to be like the video of its day. That was the kind of how they started mass producing video devices.
Okay.
And then the Lumiere brothers, they were looking. They kind of went on to develop that even more, and they made something called the cinematograph, or however that would be pronounced in French, which is obviously where the word cinematography comes from. And this was like basically this device that was a camera and a projector, printer all in one, and that was used then to capture moving images, and that would basically form the where moving picture and motion picture would come from.
Okay.
So going back to the photos, around the same time, a guy called George Eastman is pioneering the print process. He starts manufacturing film, and this is where the Kodak camera came from. So
this we definitely saw in the museum,
right? But you would have heard Kodak, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Right. So Kodak made this box camera. This was basically the first, or one of the first, but definitely the most popular mass-produced type camera. One that people, everyday people could own and use.
Like Pitbull.
Yeah. That's funny. Picture me with a Kodak.
Go to Times Square.
Yeah.
Take a picture of me with Kodak. Sorry.
That's going to be lost. That's going to go over the head of a lot of people listening to this. But yeah. So there was different iterations of this. It would become known as the box brownie. This was basically a box camera that had a film in it. You could take a load of photos. I can't remember, there was different versions of it that took different numbers of photos. They'd send you the box out. You'd take the photos, you'd send the box back. They then take the film out, process the film, send you a new box so you can take some more photos and the prints with it.
Right.
And that was how the process worked. And that's how early commercial / consumer photography was worked, really. There's obviously lots of other things that happened, but that was the basis of photography for the next few decades. And there was also companies experimenting with like larger format and using things like 35mm film, which became a bit of a standard later on for professional cameras and also for cinema stuff. So there were companies like Leica, which you might have heard of. They were kind of pioneers in this area. 20s and 30s, reflex cameras were being developed and becoming more popular. And this is what the basis for the SLR was. So the SLR became the standard of professional cameras. So that's single lens reflex. And that's basically what the way that was developed was all to do with like a mirror and a prism and basically our cameras don't have that because they're mirrorless, but this was what they used. It was capturing it on film, 35mm film. And that's basically what professional photography became. Around the same time, 1930s, we also saw the addition of sound and colour to film, and cinema was starting to really take off at this point. So, but you still had to go to a cinema to watch it. So you could watch a moving picture. They'd managed to create a moving picture, and then they could project that. And they used to kind of put it onto 35mm film, and that's how they've captured it, and that's how they were displaying it. Okay. And they'd managed to get it in colour, and they managed to get some sound in there. So cinema was really cool, but obviously you still had to go to a cinema to watch a moving picture. You couldn't watch it at home. But around the same time, they were creating the TV. But it took a long time after that. They got the process of having TV and using like tubes and stuff in a glass box to display an image. But to make that kind of cheap and viable enough medium for people to have it at home took quite a while after that. Okay. And the thing is, then you've also, if you've not got anywhere to watch it, then people aren't going to be making loads of TV programs. They're not going to be broadcasting them and things like that. So it's always kind of the medium of what we're watching on that takes the time for everything to progress. Right. If that makes sense. And we're going to come back to that in a second. Okay. So film at the time as well is based on 35mm film. So like videos or movies are on 4:3 standard format. So and then over time they started to mess around to squeeze the image. There was something called CinemaScope that they developed, and that's where widescreen came from that we know it today, because they basically squeezed a 35mm image to make it wider. Okay. There's lots of processes and different standards that came out of that. I mean, like if you think about, can you remember when you were younger and there was like VHS and Betamax, and then when we were a bit older there were DVD and there was
Blu-ray.
There's Blu-ray that came after, but at the same time as DVD there was something else. I think it was like CD, HDR or something. There's always been like different formats, and it's always about like there's always one that kind of succeeds, and that becomes the golden standard, and that's what everybody uses. So back to kind of the digital image capture now. So this has all been analog up until now, and then through the 50s and 60s, electronics are starting to become a bit more of a thing. We're using electronics there's the space programs starting to develop, air travel, all sorts of things are like really coming on, and electronics are starting to become a big part of different parts of life. Yeah, they're putting like these little conductors. They found these little conductors and stuff. So they're developing things like metal oxidized semiconductors or MOSs and and CCDs, charge couple devices, which are like basically these little chips, and they realize that they can capture light and they can capture images too, but they don't really do anything with it because there's just not the rest of the technology involved in it. Yeah. 1975, a guy called Steve Sassons who works at Kodak develops what is classed as the first kind of proper digital camera. But over the years, that doesn't come out as a thing that people can buy because it's just not viable. It's too expensive. It's too hard to make. There's nothing you can't look at these images anywhere. So it doesn't really work. And for the next kind of couple of decades, you've got lots of different companies trying to do something with it, but the processors and the computers aren't there yet, to make a small digital camera. And in the late 80s, they developed a standard of MPEG and JPEG, Moving Picture Expert Group, joint picture expert group, and they become the standards back then of a moving picture and how that is captured / compressed digitally, so that it's small enough to be put on on some sort of storage device. Same thing with a digital image. So these standards are created, and then through the 90s, companies like Fuji, Kodak, Canon, they're all kind of producing and starting to sell digital cameras, but they're not like what we've got today, because they're having to start off with, they're having to use like floppy disk type things, and then they start to use slightly better devices, but slightly better storage devices, but then they're still not very big, and the processes that you need to do it aren't really there yet, so the quality is not very good. We're not talking high megapixels, we're talking really like low quality photos. So compared to a film camera, these are really shit photos.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the same with video. It's much harder to do motion video, because they were still using film cameras to do movies, because you've got so much data there, that you can't store it anywhere. So at the time, film is still the golden standard.
I see.
So it's only kind of as storage and as compression and processors. So like, you basically need storage to store the image, and then you need the processors to interpret and display the information. And you need a decent screen as well to be able to view it on.
Yeah.
So until all these things catch up, even though they could capture an image digitally, they couldn't make them as good as a film camera and taking a photo or making a motion picture, a movie on a film, because they couldn't get all the other parts in place. So then it's only kind of into the 2000s where all those things start to come into play.
Okay.
So if we kind of fast forward a little bit, 2000 and early 2000s, you've got like camera phones starting to be put on things. So do you remember your first camera phone?
Yeah. I bet it was a Nokia.
Yeah.
I bet it was.
What did you think of those photos? You think they were good? You think those images were good?
All blurry. All blurry from motion. Like taking it, but it would be not just blurry, but you could see that the because you raise up your phone to take a picture, but then the obvious thing is to drop it down. So there was just like this smear almost just down all of my camera photos from my first phone.
I imagine.
Yeah. So, but you'd barely be able to pick out who it was, what it was. Yeah. Very dark.
And we got together 2005, and I know I had like a Sony Cybershot camera.
Oh yeah.
You had Casio. I think Casio were quite big players at that point in the photo game. Yeah, you had a white camera. I remember it did video as well. The reason I remember it is because there's a video of me singing to Spice Girls on a holiday that's come from that camera.
Brilliant.
Right. Yeah. So,
gosh, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, our first ever holiday, you brought it on that. So that's.
Oh, not a phone.
I meant like a camera. So I'm basically saying, right? They started putting cameras in phones.
I thought you were on about what phone that I had, but I remember that little camera.
You had that, and then around the same time, they were starting to put in very basic, very early days. They were starting to put little cameras on phones. It was a gimmick because they weren't any good for doing anything, but they'd started to do that. And I think around the same time, you could send like a picture message, right?
Right.
So you could. I think it cost you like £1 or something, but you could send a picture message, and the picture was useless, but they'd figured out a way of compressing that image enough, and then because like the speed of the cellular network had slowly risen, you could send a picture, but it'd take you about 2 minutes to send it, and then another like several minutes to download it at the other side, and it'd literally be like a few kilobytes in size. It'd compress so much you couldn't tell what it was, that it was badly taken in the first place. So
and if you got a text message in the process of it sending, it would stop it. And then you have to start again.
And this is what I'd say. This is around between 2005, 2008.
Oh gosh, that's crazy.
Right, so that's what's happening then. 2007 was the iPhone. That changed things big style, because that was the first. Even the camera on the first iPhone wasn't very good, but it was much better than some of the others that had been there before. They'd actually figured out that we need to put a decent camera in this thing, and build almost the phone around the screen and the camera. So rather than making it a phone that we just add a camera to, they built the screen so the screen was good enough to like go, oh, that looks like a decent image, and the camera was okay as well. So that's kind of, that revolutionized things in terms of the first smartphone / decent camera phone. And there had been a few decent camera phones up till then, but you still couldn't do anything with the images.
Yeah.
You know. But all of this is about storage up until around now. Because even like that cameras that I told you about, I had that Cybershot one, you know, you'd put a memory card in that, and at the time a 16 gig memory card might cost you, you know, £100 or something ridiculous. And you would only be able to get, you know, I can't remember, but let's just say, for instance, maybe 100 images on it or something. You know, it wasn't, you couldn't store a lot of stuff on it, and and you couldn't buy bigger memory cards to store stuff on it. So that was the kind of thing that set it down. In 2008, Canon bring out the 5D Mark II. And the 5D Mark II was the first kind of prosumer professional camera that, as well as being good for taking photographs, you know, digital camera that was good for taking photographs, you could also shoot HD video. So we're not just talking video that was like really low quality.
Ooh.
So you could actually shoot HD video, and they ended up using it to film certain bits in a few movies. And that kind of changed the game a little bit, because the quality was now good enough to use it for professional reasons.
Yeah.
You weren't just taking these like videos that were quite substandard compared to, you know, doing it on a proper video camera.
Yeah.
Video cameras had kind of they've started to make digital video cameras and broadcast cameras that were good at that point, but not for the consumer. Yeah. So, or not for let's say a wedding videographer. So this is where things really started to change.
I wonder if there's anyone that's listening that started out on that.
I imagine there might not be people listening to this podcast, but there's lots of people in our industry that will have started out on that. Loads. It's actually where it's the first camera that at the time, you know, if you were something like a wedding videographer, it's where people started to switch from filming on like a larger, you know, remember our wedding?
Yeah.
The dude was on like a bigger camcorder, shoulder mounted camcorder.
Yeah.
It's where it's where it was possible to switch from the larger shoulder mounted camera to that.
Right.
Yeah. So it kind of, that paved the way then for companies like Sony, rather than investing in DSLR technology, because this is the DSLR age now, right? So for the next few years, DSLRs are like, everyone's going all in on DSLRs. But Sony, didn't have as big a camera division as Canon and Nikon and people like that in terms of like photography. But they kind of must have seen, companies like Sony and Panasonic must have seen that we're not just going to be talking about photo, we're going to be talking about video too. So we want something that's more flexible and uses a more modern technology that's going to be the one that develops, but also the one that will suit photo and video. Yeah, because in a video camera, you wouldn't have a shutter, a physical shutter. You would have an electronic shutter. But in a photography camera at the time, you still needed the actual shutter process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sony started to develop mirrorless cameras. They still had an actual physical shutter as well as an electronic shutter, but it would be basing it around a mirrorless system would be the way that they would change the technology and the way that a camera was made, and you know, the form factor of it. and the internals that would kind of lead to the electronic shutter being now in a Sony camera is the main thing.
Okay.
Yeah, or certainly in a camera like an A1. Yeah. So that's basically 2013. Sony makes the first full frame mirrorless camera, the Sony A7. We actually had a camera before that. In 2012, I bought a Sony NEX5, I think it was. That was not anywhere near as good as, like some of the stuff that we've gone on to get. But actually, I remember our first wedding, I used that as the second angle. And it was okay. It was decent enough quality.
Yeah.
And I got that for the kids, to photograph and video them growing up. So that's kind of where you are with that sort of stuff. Obviously, through the 2000s, 2004, Facebook is created, and about a year later, people started to be able to share photos on there. Again, taken on a camera phone or on a little point and shoot and uploaded by the computer. Not very good quality, the storage and everything, the picture qualities are not good, but you can do it. And it would be from there that this is where it all starts to change, because people are now starting to take photos on their iPhone or on whatever smartphone they've got, and they're able to then start uploading them straight up to Facebook. And then later, as other platforms come about, your Instagrams, your Snapchats and your TikToks now, the Twitter, they all start to become a bit of a thing. This is what this is about now. It's about photo sharing. And then as bandwidth and internet speeds and quality of the video that you could capture on a smartphone improves, then it becomes about not just photo, but it's now about video. And this is all basically, this didn't even happen until 10 years ago. None of this was happening. So 2012 is when YouTube started. How crazy is that?
Oh my goodness.
So that's 11 years ago. So 11 years ago, YouTube didn't even exist. Now it's probably the biggest place of global consumption of content. I don't know that for a fact, so don't quote me on that stat, but that is probably the biggest place, storage and consumption place of content across the globe. Yet it didn't even exist 10 years until just over 10 years ago. And even then, you're talking people were uploading short, quite low quality videos, because that's the medium of technology at the time. You couldn't, in 2012, you couldn't upload gigabytes of video. You know what I mean? It would take you days to upload that. So you just couldn't, it was a short video and it was fairly low quality. Now you can do 4K video that's hours long and upload it, and it's gigabytes of file, and it uploads within, depending on your internet speed, 10 minutes, half an hour max. It's just such a different world. And that then goes into higher quality phone cameras, high quality phone videos. And it means that people can just do a little video on the phone, upload it to Instagram within seconds and share it. And that's basically, from 2016 up till now, that's what's basically become the new thing that people are trying to get better at. Not just people as in content creators, but as in companies have been focusing on that as the area that people want.
Yeah.
People want to be able to do stuff on the phone and upload it as soon as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And that's where the internet speeds come in. I hope there's that. Do you think that's been really boring? Or do you think that's been quite...
No, it was long.
Okay.
But
so
I think if you consider how long it took from where it started, how long it took, and obviously sign of the times and all, but where all of that technology kind of slowly, very, very slowly evolved. But then look at the speed of the rate at which things are moving right now. But isn't it interesting how with like the switch from DSLR, for instance, to mirrorless, the advances that are being made, they still have this link back to history, don't they?
Yeah.
So like think of the use of kind of prisms, of mirrors, things like that. All that stems from somewhere.
Yeah, because you had to invert images and things.
Yeah.
You know, and you needed, it was the way that you looked at things as well. So the main kind of difference between, let's say, the mirrorless cameras we use and a DSLR is that with a DSLR you're using an optical viewfinder. So what you look at through the eyepiece on the back of the camera is the actual image, as in you are looking through at what you're seeing, right? And that's it. When you look through it on a mirrorless camera, you're actually looking at a digital image on a screen. Yeah. So whether you're looking at the screen on the back of the camera or you're looking through the eyepiece, you're actually looking at a screen that is interpreting the image that the camera's seeing. And it is, because all it's seeing is a digital thing. It's seeing zeros and ones and some colour. Yeah. So it's basically interpreting that and displaying it on a screen, whereas an optical viewfinder, you are actually just looking at whatever you're looking at. And that's how a mirrorless camera, you're able to change your settings and see how your settings changing is affecting the image. So you can basically see what the final image will look like when you change your settings, whereas on an optical, and you've never used a DSLR, so you wouldn't know that if you take a photo on a DSLR, you don't know what it's going to look like until you look at the back of the screen. So when you've seen photographers in the past looking at the back of the screen, it's because they're seeing whether they got their exposure right. Whereas you've learned on a mirrorless, which means you know already what you're. So that's a huge, when you think about what a leap in technology that is. But the only reason they couldn't do it until when they did, right around after 2010, is because they needed screen technology to be better, because you can't make an eyepiece. They didn't have OLED screens. You needed them to make an OLED screen or something very high resolution and a good small screen that was not too expensive to make before they could actually employ that technology in something that was mass produced. So that it's all about how we view things and how we consume things. And that's what the whole point of this episode is about.
Yeah. So they're not even just about the finer detail of the tech there, but the problem solving that's evolved as well.
Yes.
And where that's stemmed from. So you talked a lot about tech that was being developed for a purpose, for capturing images, for creating films. But in terms of the consumer or just Joe Public being able to enjoy that in the comfort of their own home, they couldn't, because what could be captured couldn't be viewed or couldn't be seen in their home, couldn't be enjoyed at home. You had to go to the cinema still, like you said. You had to kind of go to a different environment to see it. But then with... but then also, storage, compression you've talked about. But then as it's become more available to the consumer, to the mass market, it's like it's the learning back from that, isn't it? And it's a circular process. It's how that changes, and then that how changes consumers. So consumers change with the technology, but the technology can't change until the consumer wants it, because there's nobody buying it. So then, introduction of social media, like you were saying, when we were starting to kind of use that initially, that would come from my little Casio digital camera, those images uploaded onto my computer first, and then from my computer, I could upload those onto MySpace or Facebook, things like that.
But how big a process was that? And how quick now is the process? Snap. Boom,
instant.
It's up. So that evolution, lives, you couldn't have done... the idea that you could live stream from your phone is just insane. Like, when you think about what you would have had to do to stream a live broadcasted image, you needed in the 80s and 90s, you needed a truck, of TV equipment, of satellite dishes, of highly... high processor computers to do all this stuff, send the image to somewhere. Then there was somewhere sorting that image out and then broadcasting it live for football matches or something like that. Now you literally just press a button on your camera and you go. And it's all because of the internet. So like there's different things here. Part of it is technology as in like the hardware, and then part of it is like the software and the internet, which isn't a software necessarily, but it's this thing that is constantly evolving. And as it constantly evolves, it is now the biggest influencer. Like people might think that the camera in your hand is the biggest influencer in what's going to happen next with photo and video. It isn't. It's the internet. That's all it is, really. Because as the internet, as speeds improve of like data transfer, as technology of how you can manipulate that data changes, that is influencing what we do with the images and who wants and needs the images and how they consume them. You know, you can't virtual reality, gaming, for instance, or just gaming in general. We used to play on a console, and if you wanted to play against someone, they had to be sat next to you. Now they can be sat anywhere in the world, and there's no lag, and you're playing live time, playing live video games against people. That in itself is just such a transformative thing. I don't think you could do that 10 years ago because it just wasn't fast enough, the internet.
Look at live streaming of the live events now, weddings, funerals, things like that.
There's no way you could have done that. So you know, if we kind of look at it, the drives of change through history, it's always been focused around how people view, you know, whether that's something they want to consume or preserve memory, watch a movie, how people enjoy it. So whether it's like, I can tangibly look at this print or I can look at this photo book, to now, not that people don't do that now, but they wouldn't do that very often. That might be a occasional thing. People instantly want to be able to put things on social media, so it's changed the game. We're not like, I want this really, and I'm not going against print here. What I'm just merely saying is the majority of people will not print their photos, right? And they will not watch videos on a massive telly. They might watch a film or a TV program on a telly, but they're not going to watch. I watch YouTube on a telly, but most people won't. They'll watch it on the phone, right? And that means that that's how people are consuming it. Photos, they're consuming photos on social media. They're not, or an online gallery. They're not printing them out. So that is the driver. It's the appetite of the consumer. You know, when you think about it, with cinema, the hurdle was a projector, right? It was huge. It was complex. It was expensive. You couldn't watch it at home. As projector systems evolved and eventually the TV was created, it changed people's appetite for content, for TV, for viewing things. They wanted to be able to watch it at home. They didn't want to have to go to the cinema just to watch something. Yeah, they'd still go to the cinema to watch a new film. And that was actually, so I'm probably getting a bit into it now, but that was probably more to do with the film industry wanted to hold content back. So they wanted to get, you know, they needed people to go buy cinema tickets, right? So they hold those new films back. And if you wanted to watch them, you had to go. But TV became its own industry, right? And people wanted it at home, right? Now, people want to watch it on their mobile phone. So what has that done, right? Just like TV used to be 4:3, because that was the original film standard. And then film, they started squeezing the film to make it wider because that was better to view a moving picture on, because you got a better context of the what was happening. That eventually cascaded into TV. Now all TVs are widescreen. That didn't happen until 20 years ago.
No.
Right? That's now become the TV standard. What do we do now, Linz? How do we view content now?
You stream it and you watch it on a device of some sort. Right.
And which way do you view it? Do you view it how you hold your phone, or do you view it sort of how you're supposed to view video, which is landscape?
Yeah.
It's so now people are now prioritizing vertical content, Instagram Reels, TikTok, you know, YouTube Shorts. It is now changing almost. I'm not saying this is changing the standard of how we watch film, but it's changing a standard of how we consume some content. And it's nothing to do with what looks best. It's to do with how we view it, because we hold our phones vertically. If they made the phone square or they made the phone landscape, that's how we would view it. That's the difference. So you have to think about what people want and how people are wanting to watch it to understand how that might influence. For example, if we take wedding photography, I know loads of people now talking about they take more portrait images at a wedding than they do landscape images, even though in lots of cases that doesn't necessarily make sense. So they're shooting on wider lenses so they can get more into a frame when they shoot portrait. That's nothing to do with it looking better. People will say, oh, I just like the way it looks. You don't really, I don't think. I think what it is you need to be able to post vertically.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Because that, you then go in from, or you're not only considering, right, what can I think about might be coming down the line? It's about problem solving for people, essentially, isn't it?
Exactly.
Your service delivery is essentially about problem solving. How do I problem solve for the consumer? That is, how do I problem solve for me?
For marketing.
For marketing purposes. Because, like we've talked about previously, when it comes to your workload management, when you're thinking about your post-production process and you're thinking about deliverables, end product, there's the deliverables for your client, but then there's your own deliverables, like you've said. So all those different aspect ratios that they need to consider, because your problem to be solved is, how can I make use of this content, like you've just said, for marketing purposes, for kind of raising my profile going forward? Well, I need that in a different way to what I've just delivered it, how I've just delivered it to my clients.
Yeah. Whereas before you were focusing on, a client will look at it in a book or they'll print it out. So if it's a portrait picture, it makes sense to use a portrait aspect ratio. But if it's a landscape picture, what I'm trying to fit more into, and I want to give more context. The reason we use landscape and portrait is because you want to use context. So portrait is aiming to show you the context of that subject. A landscape is to show you the environment as well as the subject, right? But we're now starting to, not only with still images and photos, but we're now with moving images starting to force ourselves into using a aspect ratio that doesn't really make that much sense. If you're filming yourself talking to camera, doing it vertically kind of makes sense, right? But not like, for example, at a wedding, people now, we're doing it too, making trailers in a vertical format. They don't really show what you want to show. This is why so many wedding videographers struggle with using the vertical thing, because they know that how they filmed it and what they want to show in that frame is not going to look right when they do it vertically. It's a totally different thing. And photographers have got the same problem, but they're just adjusting the way they shoot. Whereas I'm yet to see videographers walking around with the cameras vertical. Yeah. And it would look shit, I'm going to be honest. Yeah.
And I think instead then, so we've talked about with some of the first few weddings that we've done this year, when you're thinking about, of old or just regularly, you might just think about, right, there's a shot of the bride and she's having her makeup done by the window. I want a wide, a mid and a tight shot of that.
Yeah.
In terms of a composition, we love to shoot, think about your rule of thirds and things like that. So we love to shoot top, bottom, left, right, corners, things like that, because that looks really nice.
Leave a nice negative space.
Yeah. What have you said to me?
I've said shoot central, shoot symmetrical so that it's easier to crop. Which is totally different to the way that we've shot for the first few years of doing this. And it's all because you need the flexibility of being able to create different So if you think about it, it's actually got, this has totally got the potential to change not only, you know, just how people view it, but how actually as creators, how as photographers, filmmakers, how we start to influence our composition. You know, which is a bit crazy, because the composition side of it is probably the bit that's been developed not in relation to technology or anything like that. It's been developed in relation to art and aesthetics, right? And how you communicate that image, that moving image, that still image. That's a very different thing. That was never part of the technology thing, right? That's now being influenced and changed by the technology. And that's the whole point. So if we'll go through some potential other things that are going to change here, but we're basically at a point where, right, if we talk about photo and video being separate, because if you are someone that doesn't believe in hybrid and doesn't believe in capturing photo and video and doesn't believe that they're the same skill set, but yet we're talking about how technology is changing the way we're making art, how we're composing things. So of course it's going to change whether photo and video are separate mediums anymore. Think about it like this. Possibly we could go away from a vertical resolution, because will phones actually be the thing in 10 years' time? Or will we have more virtual reality experiences that are immersive? You know, people just put a headset on and they view, and they're going to view not just widescreen then, they're going to view super widescreen. It's going to be like a really, really, really wide resolution is that. And that's, you know, it'll be like 32:9 or something similar to that. It's not going to even be normal widescreen. So vertical might actually be a bit of a flash in the pan in terms of technology. I don't know that, but I'm just trying to think, are you actually going to walk around with a device in 10 years' time, or are we just going to put a headset on? Yeah? Like if a watch became the thing that you use to look at all your photos and videos on, would it be a square image? You know,
okay.
These are the sorts of questions you've got to think about where the technology is going.
Okay.
So, you know, that could really contradict how everybody's doing it today, and it could take it in a different process. And obviously, if that's how people are viewing it, then content needs to be made in that way. You'd be no good making vertical content anymore, because now everybody's viewing it super widescreen. So now you've got to film it super widescreen, or take the photos in super widescreen. Yeah? Other features that have changed more recently and are beginning to like develop and change the way we do things. We've mentioned EVFs, so electronic viewfinders. That has massively changed it, because we're no longer guessing with images. We're seeing what we get. They're much better. They get better all the time, get clearer. Autofocus was there on film cameras, but at the same time, you know, well, later in the 80s and 90s. But the thing is, you know, now autofocus is so good, and the AI that they're putting into autofocus, it's almost like now the computer's making the decision what's in focus, you know? Codecs, so how high the bit rates and how high the data is being stored, like mind-blowing. When you think about 20 years ago, you had this pixelated image, video, whatever, you know, the amount of detail now that you can store, because they've realized how to preserve it and put it into a usable size file. Storage costs. So solid state storage is like a game changer when you think about it, and that's only really become cheaper in the last 10 years. Before that, it was hard disk drives. You couldn't really save images quick enough to that. And before that, you're talking optical stuff like tape. Do you know what I mean? It's these technology things have only happened in the next 20 years, but they're going so quick that you might be able to store huge amounts of data for very cheap in the near future. Storage costs, resolution of megapixels, how many megapixels do you need? Well, how many Ks do you need after your video footage? We had HD, now we've got 4K, now we've got 8K, there's 12K, 16K. And this is on prosumer level stuff. We're not even talking about, really high end stuff.
Yeah.
So where's it going? Where does it need to go? The reason that holds that back as well, and the reason that holds some of this back I mentioned, particularly for like us as wedding photographers and videographers, is the editing, the computer processing. So it's only when the computer processing's caught up that we can actually then interpret the data and manipulate the data quickly.
Yeah.
And until you get a new computer, you see a massive difference in how quickly you can edit something and how quickly you can export something. And we didn't have that before. So that makes a massive difference.
Yeah. So
the future, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, mobile devices, where does it go? Like sensors are going to get more advanced. They're getting better, higher res, storage gets cheaper, codecs are getting better, the quality is getting better, the processing's getting better, internet speeds just keep getting better. So you can send stuff and share stuff quicker, larger items. That's where things are going. That's why video, that's it. That's the reason video is here in the way it is. It wasn't 5 years ago. People weren't uploading videos straight to Instagram 5 years ago. Or if they were, it was like not very many people were doing it.
No.
Right? Now it's become the primary thing. Everybody's reacting to it because it's like, we need to do video, and everyone's doing it on the mobile phone. So instead of doing horizontal videos that look good, we're now doing vertical videos because that's what we're using to make them. So, the stuff like, have you seen that headset that Apple have got coming out?
Yes.
Something like that, has the ability to, you could film something on it like you're there and then watch it back like you're there. You could have AI and augmented reality create, people that aren't with us anymore and insert them into stuff. It's not crazy to think that they could do things like that. Have people that aren't even there with you. Have people that are in their house, wherever. You've got your headset on getting married and you can see guests that aren't even in the room with you. Now, it sounds crazy and we're starting to water down the human experience, and I don't think that will ever, I don't think the human experience of being in a place with people and doing things together will ever go away. I'm merely saying, when you think about the changes that could happen to our industry and because of technology and how quick it's moving now, we could be there very quickly.
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff that we talked about to begin with, that happened over a couple of 100 years, really. Right? And it took a couple of 100 years before we had a digital camera. In the last 20 years, we've gone from having digital camera to like that could take a photo and store it on a really, primitive memory card and maybe a really low quality video that lasted a minute. And we can now easily film a whole wedding and take photos, and store it all on this quite large memory card, but in quite small storage, and then process it all on our computers. We're not really far off being able to have a single data stream where you can just pull stills from a video. You could video the entire day, recompose the camera, and just take the stills as you wanted. There's technology to be able to refocus after the fact. Basically it just captures all the data. There's actual, you can do this in your iPhone, but
I wonder how that sits with the Steadfast. It's either photo or it's either film.
Well, that's not how I wouldn't prefer to go that way with it. I'd prefer to be intentional about whether you're creating a film, whether you're taking a film clip or whether you're getting a photo. I'd rather be intentional. My point is that if you think that hybrid isn't a thing, that you've got to look at the fact that there are plenty of cameras, either prosumers like some stuff from Panasonic that's out. iPhones have got this in. So if you use cinematic mode on an iPhone or the portrait mode on photo, you can choose the focus point after the fact, right? Or you can choose the depth of field after the fact. If we can do that on a phone, then it's not long until someone develops a very, very good system in a higher end camera that means we can just pick what we wanted to be in focus and what we didn't, or we do it in post-production or between the two. It's capturing this data stream, you pick it after. I mean, there are ways that you could technically manipulate that now, but it would probably look quite shit. But what if you can capture stuff at such high detail, like an 8K video, Sony A1, shooting 8K video, you can pull a really good still from it as long as you've got your settings right. It done it at a wedding. I remember someone coming down the aisle and it wasn't possible to get in the right place to do photo and video of the same thing. So I just got an 8K thing and I took photos from it. I wouldn't do it a lot, but it's possible.
Yeah.
There was nothing wrong with those photos.
And even things like Wedding at Jervo Abbey a few weeks ago. We've done the film there, but we've ordered a USB case for them. Yeah,
so we take a thumbnail off the thing, and that is not that good a quality, but it's usable.
Yeah.
If you compare it to a photo 20 years ago that you take on a digital camera, it's better, and it's from a video. So if the technology's there and it's implemented in, the cameras we've got right now, then 5 years from now, imagine what those cameras are able to do. Yeah. So, I mean, the main thing here to take away is that, it's the technology and the appetite for content, and that's what's developing far quicker than at any point in history, and that is what's shaping the way that people are using and consuming content. That is shaping what the demand is.
Yeah.
That's what people want. And that's the whole point. We're seeing people wanting photo and video together because now it's possible. It wasn't possible. Yeah. That's why industry people have generally gone against it in the past, said they're two separate things. Yes, they probably were at the time. I'm not sure that they are as much anymore. And that's the thing to be more open-minded about, I think. I've talked a lot there. I'm starting to lose my voice. Hopefully you got this far, because I think the best bit was at the end. I might have to cut it. I might have to cut it down. Or just listen to the first bit. I might have to put a little thing at the start. Listen to the first bit at 2 times speed and then slow it down towards the end.
Photography Filmmaking 101. Okay. Thank you for listening this week, listening or watching if you're watching us on YouTube. In next week's episode, we will move on to perhaps what you had in mind.
Yes.
For this week.
Yeah, so more like the practical reasons around why you should consider hybrid. Yeah. So like things to do with changes that we've seen in the industry to inquiries. So a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today has been what will influence things going forward, and we're going to provide some extra context to that in terms of what we've noticed about what people want and how people are consuming things.
And it'd be good to hear from yourselves as well. Perhaps you're in a position whereby this is something that you are considering. Maybe at the moment you are either a photographer or a videographer. It's something you've already dipped your toe into, you've already given it a try. Maybe you found it a really good experience, maybe you didn't, but you've not given up on the idea completely and you want to just learn a little bit more about it and learn about how you could make it work as a service that you offer, or something that you're kind of going to evolve into, as in become a hybrid shooter going forward. I've seen one or two people that we follow that are photographers that have come up on Instagram this week who are already now starting to showcase the fact that they offer highlight films as well, which is great to see. You know, we would only kind of encourage that, support that. That's why we're here. So,
and there's been a few people that have reached out to us since we changed the name of the podcast to the How to Shoot Hybrid podcast. They've reached out to us to say, this is something I'm really interested in, and a topic that I'm really I'm investigating as something that I might want to do. So I'm really glad that you're making this content.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of getting something from that, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got a particular question or topic around this that you would love us to cover, because believe it or not, I've made a massive list now of things that we can talk about in relation to this, and there's a lot to be covered. Yeah. Cool.
So we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on our socials at your.story.studios. So we hope wherever you are well and you're enjoying weddings if they are indeed in full flow for you. Thank you once again for listening to us, seeing us this week, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Take care, bye.